Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special conversation with Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin, the author of Anarchism and the Black Revolution, newly reprinted, one of, if not the longest Black anarchists in America, one of the forefathers of the modern Black anarchist movement, and he's graciously given us some time to ask him some questions and share his experiences with us. I'm Taj from Black Socialists of America. Let my other compatriots, comrades introduce themselves. Demetrius, you want to go ahead?
How's it going, everybody? I'm Demetrius, and it's really exciting to get a chance to speak with Lorenzo. I'm pretty excited.
Hey everybody, Dr. Chanel here. Glad to be a part of this conversation. Looking forward to it.
And of course, for those that don't know, just a brief introduction for him. Lorenzo was a Black Panther and SNCC member during the late 60s, during the Civil Rights Movement into the Black Power era. Had to leave the country, of course, due to charges against a Klansman, and had to escape to Cuba, where he was incarcerated, then sent Eastern Europe, and it was in prison that he actually became an anarchist. And I believe the book was printed first in 1979, if I'm correct. And yeah, so I just wanted to ask you, just to start it off, you've had a long career in Black liberation, and you've been through multiple organizations and allies and eras of the Black liberation movement. So what experiences can you give us from some of the major organizations that you were involved with, such as SNCC, the Black Panther Party, and the Black Autonomy Federation? What can we build upon from these organizations, and what have you learned that we should leave behind?
Well, the main thing I could say that these organizations taught me, and I guess by extension reached through the years to teach the rest of us in this period, is the importance of organizing from the grassroots. As far as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, it was a wholly different organization from the earlier civil rights movement led by Dr. King in the mid to late 1950s. And by 1960, a new movement of young people, with the sit-ins and which, were occupations by young Black people going into white racist businesses, or businesses that practiced racist policies of segregation. They wouldn't serve Black people. They would spit in your food. They'd disrespect you in a number of different ways. So the protests were designed to take up the space so that they couldn't conduct business as usual. They would not make a dollar that day. They wouldn't see their customers because Black people would be sitting in their seats. And so when this movement made its way in 1960 to Chattanooga, and as I said, this was a wholly different movement. It wasn't led by Dr. King. It wasn't led by the preachers and the priest class. It was also based in the community. It put emphasis on, community-based organizing. Well, this movement shook the entire structure of the civil rights movement at that time. And it brought forth new leaders and new ways of organizing. And it also made us see a different way of looking at what was freedom, what was a struggle. It made us look at it in a different fashion. these youth were not struggling just to get a few reforms from the federal government. They figured out early on that this was not a prime objective. They were not organizing to show some sort of respectability from the white ruling class, which is what a lot of elements within the civil rights movement of the 50s had been trying to do, is to get a certain level of respectability and, you know, win reforms within the structure of the government. Well, SNCC actually laid the foundation for the Black Power movement. It laid the foundation for even the Black Panther Party to get on a firm footing. A lot of people don't even know that by 65, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had become almost a totally different organization. It was not a pacifist movement. It believed in armed self-defense and started practicing armed self-defense. It was a movement that, as I said, it was not trying to get paltry reforms from the government. It felt that we had come this far, we had lost this much blood, this much energy, and this much struggle. We have to win not just reforms, we want a revolution. We want to completely change society. And at this time, the Vietnam War was raging, and Black people were used as cannon fodder by the federal government. And Dr. King, way before he spoke out against the Vietnam War, SNCC had already started organizing what they call draft organizers, community-based draft organizers, to go out in Southern communities and cities all over the country and to speak out against the war and to try to get young Black people not to join the military. And of course, I was one of these people. You know, in my hometown of Chattanooga, Tennessee, I organized during that time. I couldn't become a full-time organizer. I was too young. But when I came out of the Army in '67, I was able to have a deeper understanding of the nature of the war, the racist and colonialist nature of the war. And SNCC started talking about that. He started talking about it before any organization on the left, any so-called civil rights organization. They started talking about it. They even started calling for more Vietnams because they said there's a colonial war and colonial people should be fighting all over the world, including Black people here in the United States. It's an extremely potent organization. And of course, they were hounded by the federal government. We were hounded by the federal government. And in the South, and in Tennessee particularly, they set up what they call these Black Power grand juries who were investigating the subversive nature of SNCC and the Black Panther Party and all this, which was a very new organization. You're talking about 1966 when it came into existence. And it was just literally outlawed, and its leader, one of his prime leaders, were in jail within a year. And but it was an important organization nevertheless. But it was the foundation for it was laid by the organizers in the South. And in fact, one of the things that Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, who were the founders of the movement, decided to do, and I wasn't there at their shoulder, so I don't want to get, I'm a witness to history. I'm not necessarily always the history maker, but I was a witness to history. I played a little role. I mean, I always tell people I played a little role. Sometimes I wasn't able to be part of everything, but I could see it. And I'm thankful that I'm able to even give you an understanding of what it was that happened in a way that, not to sugarcoat it. But, you know, they have the white government, just one of them, Tennessee, but there were others in, you know, throughout the South were doing the same kind of thing. They were prosecuting movements. They were finding movements. For instance, in Tennessee, they found that the Black Panther Party and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee were some, in their eyes, treason. We were treasonous, and so they investigated us and tried to prosecute individuals, and they outlawed the groups. by 1968. They had outlawed them because they considered them as being responsible for all the urban uprisings and all this kind of stuff that was taking place. And so this was the context for me. I was one of the first people that sold the Black Panther Party newspaper in Chattanooga in the late 1960s. That's way before the party itself was created in Chattanooga. And in fact, there were I don't know of any parties that were in existence, in the late 1960s, that were in existence in the South. That's one of the reasons they linked up with SNCC as well. But SNCC had veteran organizers, and they and according to Huey P. Newton in his, what he called a draft of the, the SNCC leaders and some key organizers, and allowed other people to join the group. Their position was that, we need organizers, and more importantly, we need people who can train organizers. They knew they weren't going to be able to build anything in the South without a group like SNCC, working with them on some level. And even so, it took years and years before that there was a number of organizations in the South, chapters in the South, chapters, I mean to say. So SNCC was important as a bridge from civil rights activism in 1960, and then going to the stage of Black Power. And Black Power wasn't just a cultural movement, it was a widespread student-based radical movement. And in that radical wing, you had the Black Panther Party, but you also had other groups that some of which most people don't even know about today. And they were local groups. There were groups like in Detroit, particularly, were well developed. The automobile workers had organized a movement, that ultimately became the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. But they had organized L-Rum and Drum and all these at these plants. And these groups, in my opinion, I've always said that these groups are just as important, although they didn't get to develop to the stage of the Black Panther Party. And SNCC was a key organization in even, making the ties to this. And then we get to the stage of the Black Panther Party itself. The Black Panther Party and SNCC had a, some people say a merger, some people say an alliance, some people say nothing. So they had a big split over it. But they came together, and especially Huey P. Newton's defense campaign, because he was on trial for murder in California by this time. That was one of the key things that came out of that alliance. I mean, there's other things as well, other work, and then, and the seasoning of organizers and political education and other things, they went on both sides, actually. But unfortunately, or to be expected, I should say, the FBI, the Counterintelligence program, was greatly alarmed by this, and the so-called Black Desk and these agents they had infiltrated the movement, and they managed to break it apart. And, there's all kinds of stories. I don't know what percentage they're true. Some people claim that they pull guns on each other and this, that, and the other, and all this kind of stuff. I do know as SNCC was breaking up itself, as it was breaking up, you had a lot of that. People just, manifested this hatred towards each other that before they were willing to, give their lives on behalf of their comrades. But at the end stages, people were pulling guns on each other for the, the craziest stuff. I got a gun pulled on me because somebody said I was going with somebody's wife, somebody I didn't even know. I didn't even hang around the headquarters. All I went there for is to pick up the paper and get the news and so forth. And but somehow I got thrown in, because when a movement is deteriorating, or it loses lack of focus, or it loses energy, then people start pulling guns on each other. People start getting in fights inside the office space and all kind of crazy stuff like that. So in one sense, the Black Panther Party was a lease on life for many of the key organizers to go into. I hate to use the term key organizer, because many of the people who went in, you know, I know I was no key organizer, but it was at a time when, you know, it was an open door. And so some people like myself went in, and then, you know, in some cities, like in Chicago, the work to build the Black Panther Party in Chicago actually was done by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And of course, that went through another thing, like I said, with the collapse and with the split, that went through a whole different thing. And then, of course, it was the emergence of Chairman Fred Hampton. But the merger of the movement meant that this movement could have gone into a different direction. It could have gone into a direction where there would have been even more emphasis on grassroots community organizing in the South, much more. And even if we just stay in the urban areas in the South, of which there are quite a few, you know, urban cities, I mean, you know, urban areas that I should say that there could have been effective organizing in that period with the party. And even though the party, you know, got massive publicity and different things they did in California and so forth, but it could have been a different kind of movement. And at one point there was a split between forces. SNCC was organizing its own group on one level, you know, and it was a fight over that. And then, you know, people had conflict and, you know, but it was an important organization though, even if just a bridge. It, you know, as the early 1960s, as I said, in the mid 1960s, it laid the foundation for Black Power as a movement, not just as, you know, poets and so forth, poet society or something, but as an actual street movement and an anti-racist force and fighting for Black liberation, which went, you know, the Black liberation ideology that was put forth in '65 and that started coming out was much more deeper than anything the civil rights movement had actually come up with. So, and my ties to it, yeah, I sold the paper. Yeah, I did organizing, you know, against the war and organizing against racism, but you didn't have to do a lot to get yourself killed in those days. You didn't have to get on the top of a building screaming and hollering to get noticed. And I received a number of beatings and false criminal charges and all kinds of stuff by the police and the white power structure in the city of Chattanooga, which Tennessee produced the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan has always been powerful in a city like Chattanooga. You know, in those forces, in the police force, it always has been powerful there. And so I could have been killed there. In fact, one of my comrades was killed during the so-called protests against Dr. King. They call them riots. He was shot and killed by the police. And as usual in that place, his death was covered up. And that told me, a cop came and told me some stuff. A guy I was in jail, in school with, told me that I could be killed if I came back and let the Black Power grand jury get me and hold me in jail. Said that you're going to be killed in jail. Told me just like that. And after my comrade was killed, then I knew this was for real. This is for real, you know. So this is my experiences. I mean, I don't know if you want to deliver you some long lecture on that alone, but, you know, having been in these movements, even, you know, I came out of the Army and went into it, and 2 or 3 years time was a lifetime, or it could have been the death of me. Simple as that. Anything else?
Thank you so much for that, Lorenzo. Really appreciated that. For the next question, we wanted to ask, what is some advice? What are some critical points that we should consider with an organization that's in the early stages of constructing dual power in their local context? How can how can doing so in a decentralized fashion help prevent that organization or that movement being subverted by counter-revolutionary elements?
Well, that's interesting. You know that SNCC was an anti-authoritarian organization. They didn't call themselves anarchists, but they were anti-authoritarian. They didn't have strong leadership, so that, you know, you wouldn't have a situation where somebody would usurp power and no one else could challenge them. Well, the Black Panther Party was substantially different. The Central Committee gave the rank and file very few opportunities to challenge anything they did or anything they said, and it was one of the things that led to the downfall of the party. Now, I've said that that's highly controversial. Some people, you know, people are mad at me today for saying those things, but it's something that you, as new organizers or having created a new movement, has to be aware of. That's one of the first things. The second thing is political education, not just something out of my book or something or other. I mean, that's cool that you do that, but you know, the point is, how do you take theory and political ideology and apply it in the real world? So that's my whole thing. And having learned it, the things I learned back in the day was how to take how the party and how SNCC and all of them took complicated political theories that might have been the purview of a professor, and they took that and they were able to apply it to daily struggles. And that's how essentially the pretty famous programs of the Black Panther Party, you know, the survival programs came into existence because people understood it's one thing to have ideas. You can write something up on a board or whatever, you know, but to apply it in real life so that people, families, communities can get something from it, that is key. And that's what you have to learn. That's what you have to keep learning every step of the time you're an activist. You have to learn it in the beginning that your primary task is to take ideology, take concepts, learn a method of struggle in the community-based organizing, we call it revolutionary community organizing back in the day. Don't let nobody tell you. But this is what an organizer is supposed to do. And the organizer at some stage is supposed to put themselves out of business. And what do I mean by that? You've created the institutions and you've united the masses of people, and you have empowered people so that they, not leaders, not pastors, not anyone, that the people themselves in the communities who've been debased, who've been deprived of any sort of voice, they will be in a position to build the movement or become the backbone of the movement, not just being you know, servants of the leaders. We're not empowering the leaders, we're empowering the people. So, and then after you have understood this, because that's got to be part of your political education, then you got to talk about your community and your communities, and how do you break through reaching people in your communities around critical issues that are facing them right now, and understand the principle of the moment and the movement. That was some, when you hear the people on the TV talking about that, they've stolen that from the movement. That was something in early political education way back in SNCC. The movement and the moment. And there's a certain moment in time where when you strike, you know, and everything is going your way because you planned it, your movement can become powerful enough to beat back anything thrown by the white power structure or the government, which is the same thing to me, the government. So the organizer and the movement has to understand its role. The people are not fighting to empower you. That's been the problem up to this point. The old authoritarian leftism has placed so much emphasis on the cult of personality that it has made it possible for the worst retrograde practices to take place. And that's what the history of the last 50, 60 years have been and beyond. Authoritarian leftism, even authoritarian socialism, all these things have been indictments of the movement. They're not indictments of the people. They're indictments of the movement that didn't understand its role. And so an early, a movement at its early stages, and I would even submit a movement at every stage, has to have a level of political understanding brought about by community-based struggle and political education internally. So, and I didn't understand that at first. Let me just be quite honest about it. Don't get it twisted. I did not understand the importance of political education. I turned away from it. I'll tell you why. Because when I came into the prison system in the 1970s, there's all this political education and so forth and so on, but it was rote knowledge, or just brainwashing, really, cultism. And I had no respect for that whatsoever. It was years and years and years later that I began to understand the necessity of a movement. When you're charged with building some kind of movement or something, you have to understand that the people you deal with has to have a fairly common political understanding. You have to be able to understand complicated political theories on a level where you can teach it to someone else. So every member in the group can teach it to someone else. And you have to have an inner level of democracy, inner level. Don't let the ruling class steal the word democracy. It doesn't even exist for them, for us either. But so that you have the right to speak to leaders, speak back to leaders, in fact, without being attacked physically or ideologically or whatever. So the power should rest with the rank and file. And that was one of the keys of the defeat of the Black Panther Party. I'm not saying, I'm not going to tell you that was the whole reason. No, I don't mean that at all. But what I'm saying is that was one of the things that weakened at a critical stage. I'm not saying it because I'm happy about it. I'm saying it to tell you the truth. There were errors, and they weren't all by the leaders, but primarily by the leadership. And some people said they got corrupted or this, that, and the other. I don't think that was ever the case. I don't really believe that. I think what happened is when you don't challenge people, when you don't get them to speak out to you what they're thinking and what the programs can be and should be, and if you are demonized if you do so in a side of a group, then that group is dangerous for you and may be dangerous for the community. We can't have this anymore. We cannot have a situation where there is unquestioned authority in a movement. We can't, it just simply is a dangerous proposition. And I think that this movement would do well to understand the whole question about the inner democracy of the movement as a whole. And of course, you know, there's this, the whole thing about the rights of different groups that make up the movement and so forth. They have to have the right to speak out or to represent their cultures and so forth. That's part of it as well. But more than anything is to be able to put controls over the leadership position, even administrative position, put controls over it. You have to be able to question things without being perceived as an enemy just because you've done it. Those kinds of things can help save the movement. I mean, there's things that we talk about, old Panthers and other activists and so forth, we talk about all the time. If we had done certain things or been able to do certain things, maybe a group like the Black Panther Party wouldn't have been destroyed at all, would have been able to go to another stage of development and organization, and would have been able to save itself by doing so. Now, people don't like to hear that. They want to hear about the berets and the combat boots and so forth and so on. You know, they want to hear about that. They want to hear about the speeches that the leaders gave and so forth. We're not at a stage right now we can accept that anymore. You know, there's been 25 attempts to recreate the Black Panther Party, getting so-called new Panthers and this, that, and the other, and a variety of other sideshows. And every one of them got hung up on this one thing. They don't understand that you don't organize to empower the leaders. You don't organize to put on a style show. You know, you are organizing to do the nasty work of going into your own communities and politically educating the masses of people, organizing, empowering the masses of people. Now, a lot of people don't like to hear that. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear about any work. They want to know about when they can go shine their shoes and put on a black uniform and so forth and march around with a rifle. You know, there were a lot of people thrown out of the Black Panther Party or wasn't allowed to join because they had that perspective. That's something that people don't want to tell you. And the whole thing of armed self-defense was carefully managed. Now, I'm not going to tell you sometimes there weren't mistakes, but it was carefully managed because it was realized that it was extremely dangerous, and that the state would use that against them to destroy the group at any level or of the history of the group. They could have done it. You know, they could have used that one thing alone. And hell, they locked up everybody for the march on the state capitol, you know, and changed the so-called Mulford bill. That sort of like the kind of thing they got now with these what do they call them? What do they call it? These bills that allow you to have a gun, shoot somebody, and then say that you practice self-defense.
Stand your ground.
Stand your ground, right? Thank you. And that's essentially what the Mulford bill was in the first place, you know, but it was meant for white vigilantism. It was meant for, you know, racist militias and all that kind of thing that started back in the day. You know, that's what they were using it for. And the idea that black people and a black paramilitary revolutionary organization would get it and use it, well, we couldn't have that. So they changed the law. I'm sorry, I don't get hung up on the one question. Let's keep going.
No, this is great. And thinking about, you know, bearing arms and so forth, we did an interview with some of the revolutionaries in part of Congress Star. And one of the things that really struck me in that conversation that you are also giving light to is the way in which they approach the political education piece and having curriculums around, you know, dismantling patriarchy and like empowering folks to be able to have this common vocabulary, common understanding. And like, you know, they're saying there's 40 years of work before the arms piece, you know, really manifested. And so, and you hearing you talk about this one thing that could that has, you know, gotten other attempts to reignite, recreate the Black Panther Party, this aspect of kind of going into the community and seeing to the political education of folks. It makes me think about, you know, just kind of how we do that. How can we do that in a way that can really have more legs, if you will? And even the idea of, you know, what's that going to bring about? Is that going to bring about the political revolution, social revolution, a mixture of those? And what do you see as the difference between a political revolution and a social revolution even?
Well, I wrote about those distinctions in Anarchism and the Black Revolution. And what I was talking about when I was writing it was there is the whole history of revolutions that have taken place in various countries, you know, nation state revolutions. And they have been based on the political and social conditions of that particular country. And many times what you had was a revolutionary coup or civil war that took place. And in saying that, we're not talking about the kind of civil war that took place in the United States, but it was a revolutionary civil war where a particular political faction and others at that time, at that moment, attacked the existing government. You know, and in that case, it was a monarchy. But in the United States, and the way things had developed in the 1960s, it was actually the civil rights movement itself that produced armed self-defense in that period that we're talking about. Even Dr. King, when he first started out as an organizer at the time of the Montgomery bus boycott, he had armed guards protecting his house. And then there were some liberals and who knows what else that influenced him that he couldn't do it that way. But even during other stages throughout the period of the civil rights movement, there was always, almost always, a armed militia protecting the movement. They provided a ring around the protesters to prevent racists and vigilantes and others from attacking them, you know, just running in and killing somebody. They started doing that. The Deacons for Defense and Justice, and even before them, the Black Armed Guard in North Carolina, led by Mabel and Robert Williams. And so there was every country is different, of course, you know. And okay, so it took 40 years there. It took a considerable period of time, even during the period of the civil rights movement, to figure out a strategy of self-defense. And of course, to protect the protesters was one thing. And later, you know, you had the Black Panther Party is different. It wasn't a question of armed self-defense. It was a question of, you know, revolutionary violence, because they were socialists advocating the overthrow of the state. And so there's, you know, some things in there that are different. But nevertheless, every stage is different. We don't know in this period. I happen to believe that a community-based Black partisan militia or Black partisan movement is one of the keys for us resisting fascism in this period and as developing. So it's always different. I mean, you know, it's based upon the material circumstances. It's based upon the threat level. And it's based upon the support of the mass of people, not the leaders, because King never publicly said good things about, you know, the Deacons. But I tell you something else, he never refused to help. And so, I mean, it's all those things that are there. I mean, it's not just a question of what do organizers think. It's the question of what do the people think. Are they in favor of having armed marchers protecting them? I mean, I'm not saying there was a vote on it or something, but I never heard anybody say no. They knew they were facing great danger. And if there was something that could stop it, or at least hold it back, they were in favor. They were in favor of it. And so I think you're right. Political and military have to be based on a singular ideology. And it has to be something that is seen by the masses in a positive fashion. This whole idea of vanguardism, you saw a lot of it in the 60s and 70s, of a small group that didn't have a basis of widespread support in the community, running out and doing things on its own. That is a different kind of thing. And the Black Panther Party essentially didn't even do that at the time we talk about. But understand this: in the first year of its existence, the Black Panther Party was a militia. It was a militia. It was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. It changed its political orientation and its focus after Bobby Hutton was shot and killed. Especially that time. That's when they changed the rotation. That's not the singular event. I'm just saying that was one of the things. And also there was the political debate going on inside the movement about how do we keep this under control? How do we use violence as a means of defense, as a means of, at the appropriate moment, revolutionary violence or whatever the case may be, but not let it be something that destroys the movement and destroys, many more of our partisans. So I hope I've answered that question or given you some perspective on it.
You mentioned the singular idea, and I guess that's the piece that we're I'm curious about in terms of the social. I guess that's the aspect that would be the social revolution piece, like people being able to come together and say, like, we need this or we want this. How do we get at that in terms of organizing and facilitating, common thought around our needs?
Well, the difference between a vanguard organization or a vanguard party and a movement that understands that it's focused on mass-based organizing. Two different things. One is that the leadership tells you what to do, to be quite honest. I'm just going to give it to you like that. The other is you seek ideas, and you seek those ideas from a number of different places. You might be seeking it from me tonight and somebody else tomorrow night, or whatever the case may be, but you seek ideas. You study books, you study long lost tomes of somewhere, you know what I'm saying? You seek clarification, and part of the clarification has to be, what is the right approach to take? And you as an individual, or even you as a movement, may not be able to find it, but you can find it. You can find it. And what you have to do when you find it, you have to be courageous enough to have an in-depth discussion, political education, period, where you challenge yourself. And you challenge the persons who are the loudest voices, or you challenge the persons who are administrators, you challenge everybody. And by doing that, and let me just say this, I learned this the hard way. When we started Black Autonomy. We didn't understand what should be the focus. Should we be doing community-based organizing? Is it just personality cult, or is it some kind of, just partisan political movement? And when I say partisan, don't think about it in terms of, really class partisanism. Is it that? I mean, what are we doing here? And that question was not answered in the early stages. That question took a long time to go on, and I didn't even know I'd be in the movement that long. I didn't have a clue, and there were all kinds of sectarian fights. And I'm not suggesting any of this to you. I'm not saying it's inevitable. In fact, I'm trying to tell you, if you take certain steps, it it won't happen. You know, if you can honestly discuss matters, discuss ideas to the degree that you agree. On the one hand, you agree and you come up with plans. That's the key. Now, we can sit here and we can talk about all kinds of stuff. You may agree and you may not, but the point is, if we don't come up with a plan based on that, what the hell are we doing? And unfortunately, that led to all kinds of that period where we were not convinced as to what action to take, led to all kinds of bad things happening. And, you know, of course, I knew, and I've since learned that other movements, you know, before hours and after hours and in other countries and other, you know, other movements have had the same thing happen to them. And so this is one of the reasons I became an anarchist, so that we have at least some chance of having internal discussions. We can understand that we can't let leadership or power emerge to the degree that nobody can question it. We understand that we're fighting to put power in the hands of the people. And these things, that's what I'm saying. And so if you don't understand that at some stage, and probably an early stage at that, you'll have a period of confusion. You'll have a period ultimately of some sort of sectarian infighting, and you will have an ineffective movement. So, and you know, we went through that. I mean, I'll be quite honest with you. I'm not going to lie to you about it. Even my writing of Anarchist and the Black Revolution, I started writing that when I was in prison. You know, and it, you know, and everything. And I started writing it, and there were people felt like I shouldn't write it. And they felt like I shouldn't write it because they had created a faction, and their faction was an ideological struggle with me and others, and didn't want to accept it as, you know, the document that created the whole ideas of Black anarchism. And even my meeting Martin Sostre, you know, there were people who fought me for years to not divulge the fact that I was ultimately originally trained by Martin Sostre as an anarchist. And their reasoning was that he was a Black Puerto Rican, and somehow this, you know, tainted him and tainted me, or would taint me if I continued to acknowledge it. And of course, man, this was insane. And this caused a huge fight and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not here to reiterate all that, but I'm just saying these kinds of things. And the sister was asking a question, and I'll tell you something else. You know, these issues around sex and gender and you know, where you come from, where you were born in the world, and whether you're a real Black person and all this kind of craziness. These can only become contradictions if you don't have honest internal discussions, and to take issues and questions that in the street might not even get any attention, and to deal with it because you understand that that's how the ruling class uses it to split us, to destroy us. People give lip service to Pan-Africanism and all this stuff, but they don't really believe in it, in my opinion. I'm just telling you what I've experienced. They don't really believe in it. I've been to a lot of places, and I've heard a lot of stuff, and I've had a lot of things thrown in my face just because, you know, of where I was born and the circumstances I was born under. I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth, and this, that, and the other. So these are the kind of things I want you to understand. You know, it ain't some big ideological puzzle.
Thanks. That was great.
I have one more follow-up, Taj. I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. You get in there.
Because I am curious from you know, truly creating this. did you all like really target certain skills, meaning like the critical thinking piece, communication skills? Like, were those just as like fundamental tools, were they a focus?
Well, yes, they were a focus. And the reason the group was created in the first place, because we had political differences with the Eurocentric anarchist movement. That was the first contradiction. It was the first that we had intense debates on that. And of course, all during this, we were being pilloried by a lot of these white radicals and so forth, and these other movements. And it got to be very heated. It got to be, you know, people just trying to undermine stuff we were doing. I mean, yeah, so that was a problem. But my point still is, if those of you inside a movement, or, you know, the people in a movement can have a voice and can decide on issues to discuss, can decide on the importance of certain issues, because that's a key thing. You got to, you know, it doesn't just drop in your lap. You have to decide on stuff, and certain things you decide on and talk about can prevent hostile contradictions and hostile mannerisms of discussing issues. Now, if you, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it, you know, if you feel that there's a level of obstruction, like I told you about the Black Panther Party, level of obstruction, and you cannot change it, then maybe you'll have to move to something else. I'm not saying that you should. Don't get it. Oh, Lorenzo told us we should all quit. So it's no, I'm not saying that. I am saying that yes, there are going to be contradictions, and whether the contradictions are external or internal, you're still going to have to deal with them. You're going to decide what to do, what's the priority, and what's, you know, these kind of things. It weakens the movement if you're not able to discuss these matters comradely. That's the word I'll use. If you can't discuss them comradely, then, you know, people are going to have to leave or be put out, you know, and I hate to say it like that, but it's just a fact. I looked for years for some other method, and well, there are people who tried to, you know, destroy Black autonomy because they couldn't have their way. And, you know, I didn't say it's your way, my way or the highway, but what I said was, if you take action against the group to destroy the group, if you take inimical action against the group, we cannot recognize you further. And this was someone who's in a leadership role. And so forth. I'm not going to go into the particulars of it, but I'm just saying this is someone who was in a leadership role and tried to destroy the movement. And so we reorganized the group and had it go on a different road. We resolved, you know, we dealt with some of the contradictions, and we just, you know, but this is a person who was not willing to discuss the contradiction unless this person had total sway over the movement and, you know, that kind of thing. And we were not going to do that. Unless there's a majority of people want that, we're not going to do that. And if you can't work it out, you know, in a comradely fashion, then, you know, put simply, you'll have to go. And so that happened in the early stages. And so I'm not saying that that's a solution, but it could happen. I don't know. I'm not inside here. I will just say that you all should open your mind about you know, organizing and reorganize. That's what Black autonomy did several times. Came from a coalition, became a federation, became a network, went through different levels of its history to reorganize, you know, keep itself fresh, to avoid internal contradictions, but also in response to people's honest requests or honest perspectives. So it changed this, it changed this outer shell, if you will. I don't know what the situation is inside here. I cannot say. I'm not trying to spark any kind of thing.
Earlier, you had mentioned Martin Sostre, and I feel that just recently he's kind of getting his dues again. I feel that his story was kind of lost over the years, and particularly thanks to you and William C. Anderson and others, we're starting to hear about him more and the role he played. And so could you just tell us about how your time in imprisonment with Martin played a part in your development towards Black anarchism? And also a side note with that is, as a former political prisoner, why is prison abolition a key to Black liberation as a whole?
I'm going to have to answer the first part in the first vein, and then you'll might have to remind me of the second part. Let me just say that because of let me just deal with Martin Sostre. Martin Sostre, at the time, I knew of him and met him inside the New York City House of Detention, Federal House of Detention. Was the best known political prisoner in the world. He had been railroaded to prison because of his running of a radical bookstore in Buffalo, and they wanted to shut it down. And it was a meeting place for the Black youth and for other groups as well, and they didn't like that. It was deemed a security threat, both by the FBI and the Buffalo police, and the state police as well of New York State. And I was on the run at that time in 1969, latter part, on the run, and was in Eastern Europe. And I had escaped from being arrested by the Czech police, and I escaped, and I left and went to Germany, East Germany, and I eventually was captured and brought back to the United States. Of course, there was more to it than that. I mean, they gave me a good going over, but nevertheless, they brought me back to the United States in September or October of 1969. Martin Sostre, who was a prisoner in New York State, had filed a lawsuit against the conditions for prisoners, and also demand that prisoners receive the right to receive revolutionary literature, to receive Black books, and other cultural items. And of course, when he was in prison, and in some prison, when I came in, you couldn't have anything but the Bible. And they wouldn't let him have the books. They wouldn't let him order them. And they were rough on him. They try to come in and rough him up, and all this kind of stuff, because he kept asking. He wouldn't let them intimidate him. And so he managed to file a lawsuit. He was a jailhouse lawyer, as they call them back then, inmate paralegal, as they call them now. But he was a jailhouse lawyer. He filed lawsuits, several, in fact, one against them. At the time, when he was in the Nation of Islam, he'd filed that first. And then he filed a number of others on the rights to receive the revolutionary literature, the rights to, form cultural societies inside the prisons, and all these things. And of course, the whole thing about being thrown into solitary confinement years on end without any kind of due process, as they call it, in the legal world. And so his case went to federal court, and the judge was in New York City, Judge Constance Baker Motley, I think her name was. And she's a black judge, one of the few black judges in New York State at that time. And she heard the case, and he just laid it out in plain language, what they were doing to people, how they were brutalizing people. He was living literally underground in a section of the prison that was underground and that had very little light, was dank, and and they could treat you however they felt like treating you. They, throw stuff on you and beat you in the head and all that. And I've gone through that as well. And so he brought this to the judge's attention. And he's, one of the things he was famous for saying at that time was that they talk about how bad the black hell of Calcutta was in India, that they put Gandhi in, where there's a black hellhole in New York State at Attica prison. And the United States goes all over the world talking about human rights. What about the human rights of prisoners? And he gave a tremendous speech. I can't remember it all now. I'll be honest. I remember some of it though. And he was so persuasive. All the state's attorneys, even the private attorneys they hired, couldn't beat this one man who didn't even have an attorney. Couldn't beat him. And so she issued a series of orders ruling that the conditions he's being held under was unconstitutional, that he had the right to receive the literature and so forth. And but these regulations only applied to New York State. And he wanted national application. That's what he told me about. So he told me, one of the things he gave me as a charge was to go, when I went to prison, if I went to prison, he felt like I was going, in Georgia, and I'm facing the death penalty essentially, because that's what hijacking a plane was, a capital crime. And he said, when you go to prison, work on starting a national campaign in your prison and in others around the country. So that's what I did. That's one of the things that myself, and I got others to go along with it. And we formed organizations and we filed lawsuits and we did all kinds of stuff. We had a campaign, letter writing campaign, where we wrote letters to certain of the radical presses of the time, the radical publishing houses, and got them to send books to prisoners, to us and other prisoners. And we formed a revolution, revolutionary prison library, essentially. And that was one of the first ones. And then it spread all over the country. It spread all over the country, the right to receive revolutionary literature. I'm sure you can't build certain kinds of things, movements or ideas you have, without materials, without a preparatory stage. You need it, and that was the state. This was at a time when the Black prisoners movement and the movement of prisoners generally was a mass movement. I mean, it certainly became a mass movement after the Attica Rebellion, but even before that, it was it had watched the civil rights protests, it had watched the years of the Black Power movement and so forth, and it had been radicalized. Prisoners had been radicalized as a class. And so we started having political education and doing things to, increase the level of political education, but also to be able to challenge the authorities more effectively. And that's one of the things we started doing. I mean, the Attica Rebellion is just one of the rebellions that took place. There were others after that, and even before that, thing with George Jackson even was actually a prison rebellion. And before, I don't mean the later event where he was killed. I mean the ones where he was charged, with supposedly killing the cop and all this kind of. He and killing his guard, and so yeah, he was an important figure. And he inspired other prisoners all over the country. In fact, all over the world, people started knowing about him. And he connected with the anarchist groups on the outside, the ones that did prison work, and radicalized their understanding. He created his own defense organization as well, but he also reached internationally to various groups, and including, the Aborigines in Australia, some of the Black people, which a lot of people, Black people even today don't know there is a Black culture and a Black history. I'm sorry, a Black society in Britain, you know, and he was able to reach all these forces, all these, you know, to get support for his campaign. And he was able to exert enough pressure on the United States government, well, through the governor of New York. He exerted enough pressure that they overturned his conviction. And they gave him, I think it was executive clemency. He got out. It was a total defeat of the cops and the politicians and the rest of it in the state of New York. Total defeat. They were talking about an international boycott of the state of New York so that it bring the economy down. They are, you know, in those days in New York City was in bankruptcy, and the state was tottering on the edge of going down. And so if there had been an international boycott at that particular moment, it could have destroyed the state of New York. And they knew that. They're not fools. They saw that. And so they turned around and gave him executive clemency. He got out. Unfortunately, we had lost contact, and I never really was able to get back in touch with him. But that's another story in and of itself. He was the most important individual in terms of the ideas of Black autonomy. He believed that there should be a Black entity, a black mass movement within the anarchist movement. He believed that it would be able to not only fight, you know, for Black liberation, he felt, but also would transform anarchism from being, you know, purely Eurocentric, and it would transform it to reaching a higher level of its own consciousness and its own organizing. And so he had a lot of beliefs that he was able to make me understand, because we did political education every day, either during the lunch hour or at other hours when we could get together, you know, and talk. He constantly railed at me about the ideas of anarchism and certainly the ideas of anarchist socialism.
Thank you. Oh, Taj, were you gonna go? Thank you so much for that, Lorenzo. I think just another question that I really wanted to put forward to you is, you know, as Black anarchists and libertarian communists of various kinds, you know, how do you think we can, when we're going out into our local context and in our communities to organize, of course, we're going to run into groups and particular individuals that don't share our exact politics, left or progressive groups within our community. How do you think we can build? How do you think we can build and make connections and relationships with people who aren't exactly where we are politically? And also, how do we, when we encounter, let's say, authoritarian leftist elements and tendencies, how should we go about dealing with that? Should it just be you know, challenge, or should we try to convert? I just wanted to get your thoughts on how we should how do we deal with that in our current time?
Well, you've actually asked me two questions. And for the first question, I would say, you know, the organizing, you know, political education, speaking truth to the masses is different from speaking truth to, let's say, to power or even to ideological opponents. The issue of how you explain things to people is based, really, you have to reach people, you've heard this, where they are. And what that really means is that you understand the level of consciousness that they're at that moment, but also you understand the contradictions that weigh most heavily upon them. And you got to understand that a lot of people genuinely believe that nothing they can do can change their plight. And you can never give into that, but you have to understand it. And so my answer again to you is the organizer has to do political education among the people. Every social and revolutionary movement has understood that much, you know, the successful ones. There's those that don't get it and they fall off in the pile somewhere, you know. But yeah, you have to do that. You have to understand that whatever the conditions of oppression are that weigh most heavily, you have to build some kind of fight back movement or whatever you want to call it. And for instance, when we were in Memphis, we went there, we didn't know a soul. And so we started off, we had a Black Power conference, and we politically educate, you know, just based on what they had seen or what they knew about or whatever, and it got a response. But then the question came, what kind of program are we going to develop here? And that was like forced upon us because the police were killing so many Black people there in a brief period of time. It seemed that, you know, they were killing somebody, 2 or 3 people a week. I mean, I'm sorry, 2 or 3 people a month. And nobody had done any protesting about it. And the old line civil rights groups was sold out totally. And so we had to find a way of reaching to the mass of people. And so what we chose to do, and we had experience in it, was to do organizing against police terrorism. You know, I'd been organizing against police terrorism going back to the party. And then after that, you know, getting out of prison in 84 and getting involved with the stuff in Chattanooga, you know, which was the movement. There was a campaign against police terrorism. And so this was our answer to that place we went to that we didn't know anybody, didn't know anything in the manner of speaking, but we were able to build an effective movement that lasted for some time. You know, we didn't have any money, so we couldn't last forever. And we, you know, we also had reached a stage where, you know, you have to decide when to break and go in another direction or whatever it is you want to do or whatever you have to do. And so we chose to come here, and unfortunately this has been a different circumstance altogether. But so political education of the masses of people is different from political education among yourselves. That's one thing you got to understand. People make the mistake of getting out and having a shouting match with people who don't even understand what the hell they're talking about. And if you would take the time to develop a program for the people on the outside to let them know who you are, what you represent, and then target communities that you want to go in that you think your program is going to be most acceptable, you know, most favorable, seen in the most favorable light, however you want to say that. You don't go somewhere where you know people are hostile to you. You know, that wouldn't make a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, you know, we organize in communities where the police were beating and killing people. You know, why would we go over to where the mayor or somewhere, you know, his neighborhood? It wouldn't make it unless we're protesting it. And you also try to realize who the class of people are that you think will respond. Even you can bring some of those people into the movement that you've built. But you gotta, my goodness, you know, like Malcolm X said on one occasion when he was talking, he said, activists want the people to respond to what they have, to what their ideas are. Without understanding, they have to wake the people up first. And that's not a complete quote, but it's, you know, paraphrase or whatever. And you have to wake the people up first. So you have to get within their level of understanding of issues, politically educate them, don't accept or present the same solutions, false solutions. You have to have a radical solution. One of the things we were coming up with in Memphis was a revolutionary gang truce to stop Black youth killing each other. And, you know, and the craziness that was going on in the community. So that's the kind of thing you have to devise. You have to be creative in coming up with programs based on actual material conditions or circumstances, you know. So it's a lot on your hands, a lot on your plate to come up with. The people are not going to just come running to you. A lot of people believe that people just go one day rise up out of the clear blue and just come running for the doors of the radicals, you know, revolutionaries or whatever the case. They think that, and it doesn't work like that. You have to create the conditions. You have to create the mechanism so that the masses of people respond to it. You might have to change, I don't know, and I'm not telling you to do it, but you might have to change your whole approach in many ways to let people know, well, you're socialists. They hear all this stuff from these white radical socialists and their flunkies, all that stuff all the time, which gets me to the second part of your question. I believe in political, I'm not going to say political debate, but we have to have political combat sometimes. I don't believe it's helpful in every instance. In some instances, you know, you have to use other methods to ideologically defeat or deter your opponents. As far as the white left, you know, understand this. The authoritarian white left and these other forces, they are in and have been for quite some time in crisis and in retreat. That's why anarchism is so popular now. That's why there's a door wide open. You don't have to even worry about these fools. Let them say anything. Let them do anything. Well, not do anything, but you know what I'm saying. You don't have to take your time and energies arguing with people who have got one foot in the grave already. What you have to do is reach the people in the streets, you know, our people, the class of poor and working people. You have to reach them, politically educate them. You'll have to do you'll have to do political combat with these other forces. Let's not make a mistake about that. You'll have to, but you don't have to do it so that at their advantage. I mean, why get in a long-term shouting match in a situation where you're better served to build your stuff on the inside so that you're able to combat or ideologically defeat these forces? I just don't see. I had to learn the hard way. I had to learn, the comrades I work with had to learn the hard way. When you expend so much energy hollering at forces of people who don't care about you in the first place and who can't in any way hurt you, you would be better disposed building your movement on the inside, reaching the masses of people in the street, coming up with programs for that, and not with ideology. Don't let them take up residence in your head, as they say. Don't let them do that. You know, it's ridiculous. I mean, I've seen it. I've made a mistake of jumping in the fray as well. I was terrible about that kind of thing, you know. And then I got to realize, and I said, you know what? I'm helping these people have some legitimacy arguing with me rather than building the movement we have on the inside, building up our ideological defenses so that when a real threat comes along, we'll be able to deal with it. Because when the real threat comes along and you've been arguing with these fools and you haven't figured anything out yet, a push will pull you down. So that's my belief. I don't think that you're well. I'm not saying don't do it. And I was talking to Comrade Z about that. You know, he thinks that sometimes he gets the idea that, you know, every time somebody says something about you, you're supposed to get in the fight. Listen, I want to tell you all this, because this is something me and my wife both and other old school activists will tell you the same thing. You got people who ideologically disagree with you will call you a cop or call you some of the foolishness like that. And I'm gonna tell you like this, and this is what I always said. I've seen the effect of police provocateurs and you know, agents and spies and so forth and so on. I've seen people, we have seen people killed, our comrades and others, seen them killed. We've seen people imprisoned for the rest of their lives. There are enough real police, spies, and agents around without us making them up. We don't need to make them up. You got political differences with somebody, it's like you have, you know, a fight or somebody, you know. You may or may not, you know, enter into combat with them, but you have to make them at least respect you as you're not working for the ruling class. I mean, that's a hell of an accusation. And we learned that that's an accusation that the government used to destroy too many movements in the 1960s. So we can't allow that now. We can't allow this kind of stupid comment, offhand discussion, well, they're all cops, you know, so on and so on. We can't allow that. That is unacceptable. And that doesn't mean that you have to jump out and do it, but you have to have some ability to raise that contradiction, to raise that, to say, look, you got political differences with us, we can accept that. But to slander and call somebody a cop or call, you know, that we can accept that. That's unacceptable. You know, that's totally unacceptable. And for you saying something like that, we have to talk about silencing you, you know, or taking you through some type of political education or something that you won't be doing that sort of thing. Yeah, anyway. Did I answer the question, by the way? I did, okay. How we doing on time?
We're like 9 minutes away from 9:30.
Okay, we'll just keep going. I'm not going to do it all night, but I'm saying we'll keep going. I'll grant you some liberties here.
Okay.
I don't want you to go away mad at me and say, well, he didn't talk long enough for us to really understand anything he was saying.
No, I mean, you know, we're getting through a good portion of it, so I think
okay.
it won't go over too much. Chanel?
Yes. All right. So my background is in clinical psychology, and my perspective is that the healthier we can become internally as individuals, the more we can show up to the movement, to our liberation. You know, I feel like my covert assignment is I'm helping make the revolutionaries, you know, by helping us sort through our thoughts and emotions and being able to regulate ourselves enough to have these discussions that you're talking about, right? Because we defend our ideas, you know, whether they're effective or not, and being able to work through that together. You know, we need other things on deck to be able to show up and have a good discussion. So my mind always turns to, internal wellness and how we're functioning. And I'm so curious as to how you engage with your mental, emotional, spiritual well-being, you know, in the midst of all of this, you know, and persisting in the struggle, persisting in the fight for Black liberation. I mean, sir, tell me, how do you sustain yourself?
Well, first of all, you know, let me just say this. I look at the long view of history. You know, it isn't any one particular organization that I view as more important than the overall struggle, first of all. I understand, it took me a while to understand why I thought the way I thought, as you say, over the long-term period of time, and how do you maintain your sanity? Well, it's to say this. There are two types of people that came along in the 1960s, particularly. You know, 1960s was a very radical period. And while that period persisted and was going on, some of these people became very radical. They took up the refrain of the day, became very radical. But after the movement was defeated and after the period went by, these people turn to get their benefits from the state, take their positions, get their, positions of power, whatever the case may be. And if it meant going in a direction away from what they had said and what they had practiced in the earlier period, but so be it. I'm not saying they're all traitors, but I'm just saying that they rode the storm. They rode the storm at the time it was happening. Yet there are those of us who were transformed, made into a wholly different person, made into a person whose commitment and whole idea of everyday living and organizing something new came out of that period, but it didn't live or die in that period. And in fact, far from it. And so a person like that, and I'm not some hero or whatever telling you, that just that it happened to me, but I didn't understand it at all at first until someone explained it to me. And when you are transformed, it means that no matter what the external circumstances are, the historical moment or whatever's happening right now, after things have changed from the 60s or whatever, in my case, from the 60s, and you don't live in the past. You may have come from the past, but you don't live in the past. But your thinking is so radicalized that you realize that you are still a revolutionary. You might not be the 22 or 20, or 21-year-old comrade that was in the trenches back then, but you still believe it's possible to build a revolutionary movement and to ultimately win out. You still believe it. And so you won't accept the bribes. You won't accept the political positions and all this other garbage that people offer to you. And as I said, I'm not saying this in terms of myself alone. I know that there were some of those who were part of that movement who still maintained and built something new and continued to fight. So that's what I'm saying. And because of that ultimate understanding that the struggle is not for the 60s or 10 years or 5 years or whatever, that's a struggle, is something that I'm prepared to go for the rest of my life. And then when I am on the verge of passing away or pass away, then I can try to impart my ideas and my theories and what have you to a successive generation so that they can prosper and even succeed in doing the things that I wanted or tried to do. Some things I didn't accomplish. I realized that. It doesn't destroy me. It destroys some people. Let's be clear about it. They're wounded and they can never get over it. No, I'm always thinking about, we're at this period now. And this period is a product of what happened before. And what happened before was that the enemy was able to regroup. And we need to understand that so that we can regroup, so that we can build strong movements in this period. And the movement, part of this thing is to help the people to survive, not, of course, ourselves, but we have to build campaigns and structures so that the people can survive. And we're really in a situation right now where they're trying to take us out, and I'm gonna be quite honest with you, I never gave a lot of credence to all this talk about, it's genocide tomorrow, it's this and that, and the fascist state and so on. So I realize that we are in a state that has had long-term oppression of us in various forms, some of which we don't even realize took place, some things that took place. But the idea is to understand the struggle as long-term, you know, and because you didn't, somebody said, well, you all didn't overthrow the state back in 65 or 66. Well, that may be true. And it's kind of like kind of ridiculous to expect a small group, which had what, 5,000 members and maybe another 5,000 volunteers, was going to overthrow the strongest, you know, empire in world history. And that's not to say they can't be, it's just to say that, you know, to expect it to happen. And to not understand these were young people that didn't have a political experience to even equip them, as much as the groups that are, you know, that was taking place in various other countries that were getting their liberation. We are in the belly of the beast. We are in the empire. And so there's a different understanding that has to take place. Not to say that we can't win. I've never said, that's the idea. I don't believe in such a situation. Oh, you can't win. They're too powerful. They're this and they're that, and they're going to subvert this and that. They have subverted a great many things, but they still are at death's door as far as this empire. They're still at death's door, and we're the undertakers. That's who we are. We're the undertakers. They have taken a dispossessed people, and to some extent, we don't understand it yet. We don't understand what has been done. And because if we did, we'd understand what's necessary in this period. So that's also part of the political education. And I put myself through that. I don't tell anyone to do things that I haven't done myself. I put myself through that, and I study things right now that happened that I didn't even know had taken place, you know, in relation to prisons, in relations to the struggle, you know, and all this stuff, in relation to fascist terrorism, all this stuff. And it helps you to then fashion a plan for this period. And that's what we have to look at. We have to have a plan, but the plan has to be related to us and our contacts with the masses of people. We have to be all revolutionary community organizers and organizations. That's, I don't know what you want to call it. You can give it a name, whatever, but that's what it is. And so for me, that's what I think about. I think about how to do this. I think about this stuff every day, how to build a new kind of movement in this period. I'm not saying I'm going to be leading something and I'm going to be running around in the street or whatever, but I'm just saying, you know, how to take what you've learned, connect with people who think like you do, and who are, just like you say, you're looking for a way forward in terms of plans and programs. And that's what it really is. And the interesting thing is, even though Black people may not believe that we can bring this empire down, the people who run the system know it. They know how close we came in different historical periods. They know that. They count on us not knowing it and not being able to relate it to other people. You know what I'm saying? They know that. And so that's why I said political education is not the be all to end all, but it is an important place and an important tool to use. But it's more important to get out in the street and be able to, because like I said, the education that we get internally sometimes makes us to where we get jaded. And the whole purpose of creating an organizer, and organizers are created, not born. I don't know who the hell claimed they were. But the organizers that we put out the streets, the revolutionary community-based organizers, have to have plans and things to connect to the people with. Otherwise, it's just rhetoric. You know, you might as well just stand on the soap on the corner of the street and scream and holler like those other people do about religion. You know what I'm saying? You might as well, for all the good that you're doing. You know, you have to build a program, a revolutionary program to transform the imagination as well as the material circumstances. You know, and when I hear this stuff, sometimes when I said to myself, even, you know, I'm saying like, what the hell were I doing back so and so, and mistakes are going to be made inevitably. But certain mistakes can be made and they don't kill you. Some of the mistakes that were made back in the day got people killed and in prison for life, and they're still locked up. So from that standpoint, we got to find out how we can reach people, because the revolution is made by the mass of people. It's not made by the, all this fictional stuff about heroes and sheroes, and there are heroes and sheroes, and they're important, but they're not important than the ordinary working class Black person. And like Sister Jonina, my wife, tells me all the time, we organizers are part of the masses. We're linked to the masses. We're not some special class of people. We're not at all. We might have gotten more education, or we got this, that, and other, or some situation in your life, but we are part of the masses, and we cannot succeed if we don't recognize that one thing. We'll go right back to the same kind of authoritarian socialism, authoritarian organizing that we denounce. That's what we'll do. It's very easy to do it too. So I don't know if I answered all your questions. I'll ask a few more if you want to, but while I'm here, while I still got my voice, but.
Well, yeah, you sound like the transformation occurred, right? You're describing that creating a fundamental difference in how you approach things, that long-term view, being able to keep that imagination alive, keep it active, keep it going. I'm hearing you say you're always learning, always studying, always thinking, and that sense of preparedness to go the long haul, and that willingness to, I guess, pace yourself, maybe.
Yeah. Let me say this though.
Go ahead.
I want how I knew that the ideas worked. How did I know that they worked in terms of you being transformed? When you're put in solitary confinement, that's designed to break your will, designed to break your back too, but break your will first. And if you can ideologically, one, protect yourself, even mentally protect yourself, and even in the face of programs that destroy you. You know what the government used to try to destroy the radical prisoners movement? Behavior modification. And they had a program at the federal prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri, called the Special Treatment and Rehabilitative Training Program. And this was designed to, all these rebellions had taken place, and I was there in that hospital, so-called hospital, as a result of the so-called riot that took place in Terre Haute, Indiana. I was there for that, to punish me and to break my back, break my will. And I was beaten unmercifully. And all the skin on my face, neck and hair, everything had fallen out as a result of continuous spraying of chemical mace on me, And so when I got there to that place, I'd had no skin. I couldn't hardly see. I fortunately had my glasses on when they sprayed me, because it hit me directly. I might have been blinded for life. But they threw me in this cell. For me to describe the filth of this place, feces and urine at my, and fetid water at my kneecaps. You had to stay in there and eat in that kind of filth, and you had to sleep in it, if you will, standing up. And this was all designed to break you, And then they'd turn around and try to force you to take drugs, force drugging, and all this kind of thing. And so behavior modification and created the conditions for what later became the control unit, the control unit. And the control unit in Marion, Illinois, then became these control unit prisons and so forth. So this is what they used to try to destroy the prison movement, because they couldn't do anything with it. I mean, the movement of these Black prisoners was so strong and had so many outside supporters and everything, they had lost control of the prison system. And so what their first move, that they considered their strongest move, was to do something that they never had done before. And that is, like I said, use what used to be called brainwashing in the Korean War. And they used that, and they came up with a program to behavior modification to break the will of prisoners. I have to say it didn't work on me, and it didn't work on everyone, in the prison facility. But there were some people who were driven to suicide. 10 people, in fact, in that program were driven to suicide. And others were broken. They were just, broken for life. I mean, it's just sad to see, people couldn't walk, they jump around like animals, and, they forced lobotomies on people. And I'm fortunate to have gotten out of this stuff, alive. Of course, there's another story on how, when they got me out of that facility, I was a jailhouse lawyer. I managed to get word out, and the judge from up in Kansas City came down to Springfield, Missouri, and forced them to release me. If not for that, I'd probably been killed in there, as many were killed, as I said, or they were broken. I mean, they were just, they used drugs, they used whatever they could to just break your back, break your resistance. And now there's a book you can read about this. I think it's still in print. It's called Kind and Usual Punishment, Kind and Usual Punishment, by Jessica Mitford. And that book, I don't know, it may still be in print. I can't say, but even if you have to get a used version or whatever, you should read it, because a lot of the stuff that was contributed to it, especially the sections that dealt with the behavior modification program in Springfield, Missouri, was contributed by me. That was one of the things I did when I got out of there, out of the control unit. I mean, out of the, behavior modification unit. Okay, well.
Thank you. One last question though.
Okay, yeah, you said so.
We like to, with our podcast, acknowledge the things in our lives that are bringing us joy, because, there's a lot of other things that do the opposite of that. What are some of the things in your life that evoke joy nowadays?
That's a good question. Well, I would say that bring joy, jumping to conclusions. No, I'll take that back, but I'll say that, recognizing some of the things I did had value, and that they continue to inspire people, because as I was doing those things, I didn't know whether I would live or die. I didn't know I would ever get out of prison, quite frankly. And so it pleases me now to see how people such as yourself find value in things I wrote, because I wrote that book in prison. I was in Marion. And the officials were trying to manufacture reasons for me to kill myself. And that was what I meant when I said behavior modification, kill people. So for me to write the book as a declaration of revolutionary thought, to challenge the Eurocentric nature of anarchism as well, and to, I didn't know this, give a voice to successive generations of Black anarchists. I had no idea this was going to happen. I had no idea that what I wrote in '79, which was an 84-page pamphlet, would 42 years later or so would become still a a very important book, a classic work, in fact, I've been told. And when I hear this, I don't know, I guess I feel good about it. I do, but it just amazes me. I'm more in amazement than I am anything else. So I get a great deal of positive reinforcement from that. Of course, my wife has been the best thing to have happened to me as far as a person and an ally and activist. She was more important in the Black Panther Party in terms of leadership than I ever was. And she did go out to Oakland and lived out there. And she was the editor of the newspaper. And in fact, for almost 10 years, she was on the National Newspaper Committee, later the last 2 years as editor. And she provides me with a tremendous example, and also with someone I admire so greatly. I mean, I can't even tell you how much I love and respect her. And even to this day, she continues to give me feedback, listens to my ravings, and gives me positive ideas of a person who is continuing to think. That's what you're saying, of what transformation it looks like. Well, it looks like somebody that continues to think, continues to come up with ideas to fight our situation, but to realize that none of this is possible if we don't organize with the people themselves. So that's what inspires me. I mean, I don't have any happy thing I do just be doing it. I don't have anything. I continue, and I don't think revolutionary thoughts in the same way all the time. That will destroy your brain. You have to have a balance. We had a podcast the other day, she and I, and we talked about how we got together, what we represent by being together, and how to survive long term is to mean that we respect and listen to each other, and we give positive thought and energy to each other so that we can elevate. You know what I'm saying? We call it love and struggle. That's what we call it. And so, it isn't just me as an individual that has lasted long term and this, that, and the other. There's actually someone with me who is the center of my life, and who does have a broader perspective. And she was in the party a hell of a long time. I was not. It was just a brief period of time for me, and then a lifelong in prison, and so forth, and other historical and personal experiences, as an organizer on that side and everything. But she was in the party a long time. She lived in Oakland and all that, and we just happened. Well, us meeting is a whole different story. I don't want to keep you up all night. But that is the happiest thing in my life. That is it. I see her every day walking around. So that is the happiest thing in my life.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I feel like, this moment, even in this podcast, is definitely being cataloged, in a special place for us. So thank you so much.
Now, Sister Chanel, is it?
Yes.
Now, at some point, I would like to talk to you about this thing about the effect of long-term struggle on activists, and how, well, back in the day they had what they called, and you should look this up, you might already know about it, what they call it, radical therapy. And it was meant originally to deal with people with burnout, activist burnout. And of which there were a hell of a lot of people at that time going through that at the end of the 60s. And people were committing suicide, and people just, having alcohol problems. Even people that were in the Black Panther Party, this is what happened to a great many people. Now, my wife calls them walking wounded. And I guess that's an effective way of putting it as any. But we have to talk about how do we prevent the next generation of young activists from falling into this pit, and how do we even take the ones who have gone through this, and how do we give them some way of surviving through what they're going through, and show them some level of solidarity and so forth. That's one of the things we need to talk about at some point.
Oh, I got you, brother. I'll be knocking on your door. One of my the things that I focus on is building resilience and specific to the Black experience, right? So we have to redefine everything and really apply it in a different way. And then I also focus on post-traumatic growth, which is positive life changes, that's these types of transformative things that you even described that can come out of struggle, and how to facilitate that, how to get in there and help it to develop and not just leave it to happenstance.
Yeah, and that is the worst thing, is leave it to happenstance, because it never happens in a good way. Well, anyway, I hope you all got something out of this discussion, and I hope it makes a good tape or whatever. I know nobody uses tape anymore, but a good some type, a good Zoom or whatever. You can Zoom with this Zoom, I don't know what to say about it, but I hope there's something there that you all can get for political education or amusement or whatever, and I'm honored to have been, chosen to even do it. I mean, to have this discussion. I mean, it's not a lot of young Black activists kicking in the door to talk to me, to be quite honest. And the ones who are not in the United States, curiously enough. I've talked to young Black people of all places, the United Kingdom and France, and even in in South Africa, it was Nigeria. And he wrote a book called African Anarchism. Name is Samuel Kom'boa. And if you get a chance to get your hands on that book, you probably can find it online, really, but for free. But if you can't, you can still probably buy it for little or nothing. It's a very important book to have in a reference library. Very important book. And now he talks about the pressures of a military dictatorship on top of everything else. Fighting a capitalist state, but under military dictatorship during a civil war and all that, people were being killed, and how do you deal with knowing this stuff happened, and how does it keep it from driving you what they call crazy, it doesn't exist, but I'm saying it just destroys your mental capacity. So it's a good book. You should try to get your hands on it. African Anarchism.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions. Really appreciate it. This was very insightful.
I'm just hoping you got what you wanted.
Oh, definitely. Serious, as we were saying earlier, your big inspiration, reading your book definitely changed my viewpoints and I guess my life. So thank you. Yeah, Anarchism and the Black Revolution. It's new. The definitive edition is out now with forward by William C. Anderson and Joy James. Pluto Press. You can get that anywhere. Hope to speak to you again to some time, and thanks again.
Well, honor's all mine.